let me just say to all of you here in person at Anshe Chesed tonight, welcome. To all of those of you who are online, who are watching live, welcome. Or those of you who are watching the recording after the fact, we welcome you to this session. I want to thank our gracious host, Rabbi Kalmanovsky, the clergy and leadership and the staff of Anshe Chesed, who've made it possible for all of us to be together in this beautiful place. And Elana Stein Hain is the Rosh Beit Midrash and a senior research fellow at the Shalom Hartman Institute of North America. She is a teacher beloved by many, including me, and she also hosts the podcast Texting that examines Jewish life through text. Her longer bio is in your papers and online. I want to thank Elana for being with us tonight. Elana, the mic is yours.
Thank you. So you guys think I look good in green? That's like a very deep green. That's a real green. Thank you so much, Justice, for being my friend, my colleague, my teacher, my chavruta. And thank you so much to Rabbi Kalmanovsky and to the synagogue for having me. I have to say I'm a big fan of Stephen Colbert's adage that if we don't laugh, we will cry. Yeah. So what I would like to do is I'd like to start off with a little experience that I had in Israel in December. So I actually am living in Israel with my family for the year because we make interesting life choices. Yeah. And this happened, though, way before that. It was December, I guess it must have been around the time of two different really significant happenings. One being in terms of, I guess, this whole nexus of the Middle East and America and anti-Semitism and Iran. I think one of them might have been, Biden's famous "don't" to Iran. And I think another one may have been the congressional hearing for those three former presidents, or two of them I think are former presidents of universities. And so on Friday, a Friday in December, I'm walking down Emek Rephaim Street in Jerusalem, and I see a huge poster of President Biden, and the backdrop is an American flag, and it says, "Thank you, President Biden, we owe you so much." And I was like, wow, that's very nice. And then I came back on Sunday, and the poster had been replaced. And there was a huge picture of Representative Elise Stefanik. And it said, "Thank you, Representative Stefanik. We owe you so much." And I was like, well, I think I gotta get why American Jews and Israeli Jews don't always get along, right? So I think essentially what I want to do in my heart of hearts is I want to get up there here and say, I'm voting for X and I think you should too because this is the moment and the stakes are high. That is not the purpose of this talk. What I would like to suggest is that even if I tell you that's not the purpose of this talk, in your heart of hearts, you might also want that to be the purpose of this talk. The reason why I say that is because in so many places where I've gone and tried to be a little bit more, ecumenical about things, I've gotten everything from, so you support people who are liars, to, I am horrified by what you just said. And I'm not saying that to make fun of anyone. I am saying that because the temperature is so high for such good reason. And so what I would ask you to do is actually use this as a place and as a moment to not just be pushed by the temperature, but actually to just sit and think on the balcony about a moment that feels scary and feels like I don't want to go on the balcony because I want to stay on the dance floor, and that's where I am because I'm trying to do my thing. So that's my request. You may or may not decide to do it, but that's my request, okay? There are two things that I'd like to do in this talk. And this talk is short by Hartman standards, okay? There are two things I want to do in this talk and then take Q&A. The first thing I want to do in this talk is I want to try to outline a little bit about what we mean by the intersection between good for the Jews and good for America. I want to try to get a sense, not of what the people in this room think that means, but what I'm seeing Jewry, American Jewry, in its different permutations, thinks that means, okay? That's part one. And then we'll buttress it in interesting ways by looking at different versions of the prayers for government in different times and different places that in some ways manifest a sense of, well, wait a second, does this prayer seem to say that if it's good for the Jews, it's good for the rest of everyone? Is this seeming to say if it's good for everybody, it's good for the Jews? Is this saying we don't care about everyone, we only care about the Jews? Right? Just kind of interesting. So in some ways, what that's kind of doing is it's forcing us to see a bigger picture than our own picture, okay? The second thing I want to do is have a take on something that I think is good for the Jews, that is a bit countercultural at this moment, and has nothing to do with who wins the election, but has everything to do with politics and identity at the same time. Should I just skip straight to that one? No, because I have to warm you up first, okay? So here's what I want to suggest, okay? Just stick with me for a minute. I want to suggest that there are, among the people I talk to, three basic approaches to the question of what's the relationship between if something is good for the Jews and something is good for America. I see three main approaches, okay? And I want to map them for you. And I recognize I don't have like a board, so it's a little harder to keep in your head, so I'm going to keep repeating it. Okay? The first is overlap. We love overlap. It's so comfortable. It's so coherent. And the overlap can look like this. What's good for the Jews is good for America. And I'm going to suggest both a right-wing version of that and a left-wing version of that. You ready? What's good for the Jews is to be right-wing on Israel, to get along well with Netanyahu, and actually that's good for America because America really needs Israel as a tough democratic ally in the Middle East. We need tough. America needs that tough. On the left, what's good for Israel, and here I'm saying what's good for the Jews is good for Israel. We'll get back to that, don't worry. What's good for Israel, because that's a lot of what it's about, right? What's good for Israel is somebody to talk a little sense into Netanyahu and be a little tough and try to push a little bit on, human rights, try to push a little bit on liberal values. That's good. That's the kind of Israel that America wants as an ally. That's the kind of Israel we want as Jews. Overlap. What's good for the Jews, good for America. By the way, you can do the same thing with anti-Semitism, right? This one's going to fight anti-Semitism on the left, and this one's going to fight anti-Semitism on the right, and fighting anti-Semitism is good for America too. Overlap. It also goes in the other direction. And I think it's actually, I would say it's probably more about what the topic is than about anything else, right? A topic like Israel starts with, is it good for the Jews, right? A topic like anti-Semitism starts with, is it good for the Jews? So if you have an overlap, you say, if it's good for the Jews, it's good for America. But there's also things that go in the other direction, right? If it's good for America, good for the Jews. This is my vision for America, and that will be good for the Jews. Give an example. I would say, I don't really want to call this left and right, to be honest. But I would say there are a lot of people right now who say, protecting democracy has to be my number one value. That is good for America, and thus it is also good for the Jews, right? It doesn't start with the Jews, that starts with America. It starts with what is good for America. Democracy, right? I mean, you need to look no further than Hobbes. You need to look no further than Pirkei Avot, If not for government, people would swallow each other alive. We're kind of worried about people swallowing each other alive. Democracy, we need democracy, okay? And not just people swallowing each other alive, but government swallowing people alive, right? Or this I can say is on the right, right? I hope that I care about democracy, it's not only on the left, but certainly on the right, okay? I do not think that this progressivism has gone too far. Are you angry at me yet? What I just said? The progressivism has gone too far. It is bad for America. It is destroying America. And it's bad for the Jews. But it's bad for America. Right? Does anybody here identify themselves, and people at home, raise your hand. Just look in the mirror, raise your hand, acknowledge yourself. Okay? Does anybody here work that way? Where it's an overlap. What's good for the Jews is good for America. What's good for America is good for the Jews. And you actually feel that going into this election. Give me a hand up if you're an overlap person going into this election. And be as honest as you can. Okay? Just look around, everybody. I want you to notice a lot of people raise their hands, and not everybody raised their hands. I'm very bad at approximating. Do you think that was half and half? No. Well, it just depends who I look at. I don't know what to say. Somebody's going yes, somebody's going no. I don't know, right? But it was a substantial number of people who said I see full overlap, and a substantial number of people who said I don't, okay? Full overlap, that's one. And in fact, that may be prompted by actually thinking there's full overlap, and that may be prompted by wishing there was full overlap, right? And that, I got a lot of those, right? Meaning, that's important to recognize, but that's okay. It's not like anyone saying, I don't care about the Jews or I don't care about America, or I care about one more than the other. They're together. Okay, there's a second attitude that I'm seeing. I'm actually gonna say there's a second attitude that I'm feeling, okay? Which is, it's actually a cost-benefit analysis. It's a little bit less, I think, automatically what's good for America is good for the Jews, or what's good for the Jews is good for America. And it's a little bit more, where are the costs higher? Where are the benefits higher? So for instance, if I think that the cost to America in electing a particular candidate is much graver than the cost to Jews of not electing that person, then I may be a person who says, look, I gotta do triage here. I gotta do triage. You can't, when you weigh them, it's not even, who said it? There's a writer, you might know who said it, where he said, sometimes you say it's like apples and oranges, but actually sometimes it's like apples and baby wolverines. Right? If it's apples and baby wolverines, I want to avoid the baby wolverines, right? Even if the apples are a little rotten, right? And I think that people go in the opposite way as well, which is they'll say, if voting for this candidate is going to be so bad for the Jews and a little bad for America, the so bad for the Jews is going to win out. Okay? I think that's real. Now I want to be clear about something. How do you determine if something's going to be so bad? Right? Of course there's a question of just values, right? As you notice, democracy is clearly a very high value for me. You can see how I'm talking. My hand moves a lot when I talk about democracy, right? If democracy were a puppet, it would be right here on my hand, right? But it's not just about where your values lie, of this is the bigger value, and if it's in danger, that's the worst issue. It's also how likely do you think it's in danger? I actually have conversations with people all the time who, spoiler alert, I'm very closely related to by blood, where I will say, I think that if X is elected, the future of democracy is seriously imperiled in America. And I will be told back, I think you're overstating what is possibly going to happen. That is not two people who disagree that there's a value of democracy. It's two people who disagree on what's going to happen. and what's possible. And that, I think, is really hard. It's really, really hard. Or I'll talk to people and I'll say, I'm very worried that the candidate I'm voting for, you ready? Just between us. I'm very worried that the candidate that I'm voting for has a kind of appeasement policy in the Middle East that I'm very uncomfortable with and could lead to me and my kids being in a bomb shelter again. And I'm told back, no, 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 you don't get it. Right? That's okay. People have different senses of what's going to happen. But I'm intrigued by the idea that there are people walking around who are not saying, oh, if it's good for the Jews, it's good for America, and if it's good for America, it's good for the Jews. Actually, I'm doing a cost-benefit analysis, and actually, maybe I don't even want to tell people that I'm doing a cost-benefit analysis. Maybe I want to pretend that I'm so certain, and I feel so good, and it all overlaps nicely, or maybe I'm so uncomfortable about the fact that I have to go vote, even though I'm doing this cost-benefit analysis. Can I get a few hands for people who might be doing cost-benefit analyses? Fewer than what we got before, which makes me wonder who the other people who didn't raise their hand are. And like, are they plants here? It's like Manchurian candidates. Are they actually here to campaign at the end of this session? Right? But I think that's important to recognize too. That exists in the Jewish community. I mean, obviously in the American community, but my job is the Jews right now, okay? That is such a big job. Wouldn't it be better just be in America? It'd be so much easier. Because then you don't have to see them at the supermarket, and you don't have to, they don't have to be your friend, your kids, friends, parents. They're like, what did you say? I saw you. I was raising my hand, right? So that, I would say, is a second. And by the way, the irony, and Justice and I were talking about this earlier, and I'm giving you credit or maybe giving you blame. He said, I think Arab and Muslim communities are making cost-benefit analyses right now in a very serious way. Like, they can't even pretend that they're doing they can't pretend that it all works. That's the only place that they can be right now. Whereas Jews, we can either feel it all works or pretend it all works, as the case may be. And I thought that was really intriguing. I think there's also a third, right? You're with me. Overlap, I mean, you might not like it, but overlap, cost-benefit analysis, and here's my third. My third is, for which Jews? For which Jews? By the way, I love this crowd. We're going for drinks later. Right? For which Jews? I could certainly imagine, and I don't have to imagine it because I talk to Israelis all the time, who tell me who I should vote for. And when I suggest to them that if I vote for this person, it's going to be dangerous for Jews in America, they say, so just come here. Right? Right? Or the reverse. And I want to make very clear, I'm not making a moral equivalence. I actually think there is somebody I cannot vote for in this race. And I am not voting for that person because I cannot vote for them. But that to me does not change the fact that I am not the only person with an opinion. It does not change the fact that I am in Jewish community with people who deeply disagree with me. And it does not change the fact that I have a responsibility to understand the way that people are approaching this whole issue. Myself included, no matter who I'm voting for, right? No matter who I'm voting for. So which Jews? I'm kind of intrigued, right? There are people who might say, well, actually, I think there's a candidate who's best for American Jews. And maybe not best for Israeli Jews. There are definitely people walking around like that and say, I'm an American, I'm going to vote for, right? So I was really intrigued. You have a source sheet in front of you. I was really intrigued by that when I started thinking about Jews and American Jews or Israeli Jews, etc. I was really intrigued by something I saw that I had never heard before. If you look at number 6, because of course why start a source sheet with number 1? Right? If we don't laugh, we cry. Or if we don't laugh, we yell at each other. But maybe that's to come later. So let's take a look at number 6. I've been thinking a lot about this. This is, I'm not sure how to pronounce this person's name. Joel Rappel wrote a doctoral dissertation on different versions of Jewish prayers for the government, it's really remarkable, actually. It's really remarkable. And he has this, there were two things that caught my eye. This is the first one that really caught my eye. Which is if you look at number 6, he says, a similar case is known in Egypt, and you'll see what he means by a similar case. In the midst of the Six-Day War, the Jews recited prayers in Cairo and Alexandria for the welfare of the president of Egypt, Gamal Abdel Nasser. The text of the prayer indicated the feelings of the worshippers in a country hostile to Israel. Lord of the universe, look down from your holy abode and bless the United Arab Republic, and guard, protect, help, and exalt President Gamal Abdel Nasser. And then they added this last line, strengthen those who foster freedom and peace, which may have been a dig, may have been a jab, right? Like clever, right? But it's pretty wild. They said this prayer out of their own protection. Which Jews? They need to protect themselves. That's what they need to do. Another one that caught my eye is, it's sort of like the opposite, the flip side of the coin. Take a look at number 1. Because what I mean by the flip side of the coin is if you look at Jews in Egypt, and I don't know how many Jews there were in Egypt in 1967. I don't know what kind of numbers we're talking about. But if you look at Jews in Egypt in 1967, they are highly aware that their Egyptian identity requires something of them. And there it's out of fear. It's not out of loyalty, it's out of fear. And in number 1, you're going to see people who are also in a place of fear, but they don't, it's not that they care so much about the identity of the place that they live in, and that that's their identity. Take a look at number 1. It is related that at the end of World War I, when the Russian Tsar was forced off his throne, and the country was engulfed in the chaos of the war between the whites and the reds, and both were running amok against the Jews, the Chafetz Chaim, one of the great rabbis of the 20th century, and the author of a volume by that name, along with the students of his yeshiva, were located in a village named Shemitz. As they studied, the door burst open, and the leader of a white band of Cossacks ran in along with his followers. They were looking for Reds who might have escaped in the latest battles. Seeing a group of people congregated in one place, the Cossack assumed immediately that this was a group of Red fighters. The Cossack did not know what a yeshiva was, but he was certainly aware of what a synagogue was. If this is a synagogue, he said, there must be a rabbi. Who is the rabbi? The Chafetz Chaim came forward and said, I am in charge here. What do you want? I want to know what you pray for here. With total equanimity, the Chafetz Chaim responded, never in my life have I ever told a lie. He opened a prayer book to the pages before the Musaf prayer and said, there are 2 prayers here. One is a prayer for the welfare of the government, and right next to it is the Av HaRachamim prayer, which asks God to avenge the blood of those Jews who were killed, even though they were totally innocent. Now tell me, which of these 2 prayers should we say for you? The first, Rabbi, the first, said the Cossack, and he ordered his followers to leave the synagogue. This I find fascinating because there was no luxury to try to figure out, well, who's better for Russia, the Reds or the Whites? It was, hey, whoever's not going to kill us, we're good with them. And I think it's interesting, I feel very fortunate as an American Jew living in the 21st century that is not where I have to go. But I can actually either do a cost-benefit analysis or be able to see an overlap in one way or another. And yet at the same time, I think it is important to recognize that in our history and in our Jewish community, there are those for whom the particularist notion of what's good for the Jews really is everything and is often in conflict. And there might be people in this room often in conflict with what's good for the country that they live in, but they still choose what's better for the Jews. And I think that comes to the fore very forcefully in that example that we gave. Now, America, to an extent, changed that for many Jews, right? So if you look at number 3, In 1825 in South Carolina, you have a fundamentally different version of the prayer for government. Instead of the prayer for government saying, hope that government is good to the Jews, the prayer for government looks like this. Take a look at number 3 from the Reformed Society of Israelites in Charleston, South Carolina in 1825. Right? Almighty God, sole ruler and governor of the whole universe, thou who hast created countless systems for thy glory, thou who fillest all space with thy wisdom, truth, order, and benevolence, in thy boundless mercy, bless, preserve, and enlighten the President of the United States, etc., etc., etc. Next stanza. We have reason to bless and extol thy goodness, O Lord, that thou hast numbered us with the inhabitants of this thy much favored land, uniting us all into one great family, where the noble and virtuous mind is the only crown of distinction, and equality of rights the only fountain of power. We bless thy holy name that thou hast removed the intolerance of bigotry far from out this happy republic, and hast relieved the people from the yoke of political and religious bondage. Is there a word here about Jews?
No.
It's America. Now the irony is it's Charleston, 1825. If you think the only mark of distinction is, I don't know, noble and virtuous deeds, you obviously are not an abolitionist, right? But that notwithstanding, the picture is the opposite picture of our Tsarist Russia situation. It's, what do you mean what's good for America is good for you? We are America. It's all the same. Don't look for distinctions necessarily. And then I want to show you one more before I get to the more, I think the more uncomfortable part. Take a look at number 5. I often pray at a synagogue called Ramat Ra. Has anybody here ever been to Ramat Ra or know of it? It's on 110th Street. So one of the members of the synagogue, Dr. Esther Fuchs, is a professor, and I told her I was going to be speaking about this. She's a professor of poli-sci at Columbia, and she's one of the people running the anti-Semitism task force there. And she, in 2001, wrote her own prayer for the United States government. And it's intriguing, and they read it at Ramat Ra every week. And what's intriguing to me about it is she's trying to strike this balance between are the whites better for us or the reds better for us? And to hell with what's better for the country, right? And we're all in this together and there's no distinction and right? Because look at what she does. I'm just gonna point to one little area, the last stanza on page 5. Talking about the need for strength of character. Before this, it was about democracy and the Bill of Rights, et cetera, right? Nothing about Jews, by the way, until we get to the bottom stanza. May God inspire them with the courage to defend the few from the tyranny of the many, and to use the might of the United States for good throughout the world, and in support of the state of Israel, and of other nations that share a commitment to democratic values and human rights, right? It's amazing. It's amazing, right? Trying to get that overlap with distinction, right? It's not democratic values anywhere without distinction. It's democratic values, Israel, democratic values, right? I think that's so American. It's remarkably American. I love how American it is, right? So we have a lot to play with in terms of the way we've done our liturgy. So essentially what I haven't done is I haven't defined, what does everybody think is good for the Jews in this room? What does everybody think is good for America in this room? But what I have done is I've tried to express that Jews have grappled with the question of what the relationship should be between the two for a long time. And that we see in this moment Jews who are the overlap folks on the right or the left. We see the Jews who are the cost-benefit analysis folks on the right and maybe on the left, but also the center, right? Center, let's go with center, right? And even people who are sort of thinking Jews where? Like there actually is a real distinction between, and we have some of that reflected in our prayer book as Justice started, right? In different places, in different states. And what I think this is good for is, one, I think it's good for actually understanding one's own perspective on where they fall. 2, I think it's good for understanding that the person next to you disagrees with you is also grappling with similar questions. And all that leads me to what I think is good for the Jews. I just want to say very clearly, what I think is good for the Jews is not to fall prey to the political polarization that has overtaken this country. Thank you. For every clapper, there's someone horrified. It's okay. It's okay. I'm serious. It's okay. I get it. Right? What I think is good for the Jews, in that sense, can be good for America. Right? I think the idea that we think that we can give up peoplehood for partyhood is a huge mistake. And I want to suggest that it's a huge mistake for 3 reasons, okay? One reason why I think it's a huge mistake is completely utilitarian, which is you simply have less power if you're fractured, right? You simply have less power if you're fractured. Does anybody here watch the comedy show, the Israeli comedy show, Eretz Nehederet? They've had some really good, translated into English or translated into English snippets over the course of this year, because if you don't laugh, you'll cry. And one that I remember so clearly from the beginning of the war is an IDF officer who's standing in front of a bus and calling everybody onto the bus as they are in their military fatigues and they're getting ready to go. And she says, "Fascists on the bus." And they go, and you see a bunch of people who look like what you would think is a fascist in Israel. I don't have to describe it. She says, "Traitors on the bus." And you see, all the leftists who are with them, right, getting on the bus. And so on and so forth, right? And so on and so forth. Because without them all on the bus, they can't protect themselves. It's that simple. I know we Americans, we don't like to think that way. We can't afford to pretend that that doesn't matter, and that we're above that, and that we'll never need that, or that we don't need that, right? That's one. Pure utility, okay? 2, I'm very enamored by the philosopher, the 20th century theologian, Michael Wishegrad, for a lot of reasons, but one reason I'm enamored is because I read something of his that has stuck with me for a very long time. If you were starting a religion, who would you invite to be part of it? You would probably invite, I don't know, maybe if you're very contemplative, you'd invite those who have achieved nirvana. They can be part of your religion. Or if you're very service-oriented, those who care about tikkun olam, they're going to be. Or if you're very ritually oriented, those who pray like this. But that's not actually the Jewish story. It's not actually the Jewish story. Our basic narrative, God says to Abraham, it's a family. Who here likes everyone in their family? But it's more than that. Who here agrees with everyone in their family? Who here has deep disagreements morally with other people in their family? We all do. That is a big challenge of Jewish identity. Judaism is not a private confessional faith. That's not what it is. That is what we call the Protestant Reformation. That is not Judaism. Judaism is a collective enterprise with people who you think are rotten. I'm serious. Now, the question that you have to answer is, where do you draw your lines of who do you say, no, I'm sorry, we're done, and it can't be party. I'm sorry, it can't be political party, okay? And the second question is, what do you mean? What does it mean to not give in to polarization? I'm not going to validate what you think. I don't have to. So what are the ways that you actually don't fall prey to polarization, even while keeping your actual moral commitments? and being dead serious about them, and being able to express them without having, compunctions about, well, I don't want to offend, right? I think that's a really hard thing to do. I don't think that's so easy. That's the second reason, because I think that's what Jewish identity demands. The third reason, and for this, I'm not going to say it. Let's look at number 10. I'm going to let Rabbi Walter Wurzburger say it. When he was all of, I think, 24 years old, he himself was displaced from Western Europe, and I think carried a lot of guilt about the Holocaust. And he gave this talk on Yom Kippur in 1943. Okay? It is very tempting to wash our hands of all responsibility for the debacle of civilization. After all, we're on number 10. What is the individual amidst all these powerful forces? Is he not merely a helpless ship tossed about by the political, social, and economic waves? The truth of the matter, however, is that religion is no opiate at all. It offers no soothing sedative to calm the individual. It offers no protecting harbor from the stormy sea. Religion stresses the sacredness and the importance of the human personality. There is no alibi, no excuse for our failures, it says. We are responsible for our deeds. On this Day of Atonement, this message is brought home to us with extreme clarity and lucidity. When the Jews lived a normal life in Eretz Yisrael, they assembled at this solemn hour, the holiest day of the entire year, at the holiest place in the Temple of Jerusalem. The eyes of the entire people were focused on the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, foremost member of the holiest tribe of the chosen people. Imagine the awe that gripped the people when its most saintly son entered the Holy of Holies to ask forgiveness for the sins of the nation. There, facing his God, stood the high priest to give account for all the failures and shortcomings that undermine the structure of all Jewish existence. Who was to blame for the pettiness and the jealousies which have caused untold suffering to the nation? Upon whose shoulders rested the responsibility for the chaos that put man against man, nation against nation? Was it the militaristic Romans, the idolatrous Babylonians, the godless Assyrians, the faithless Egyptians? Did the high priest blame the internal enemies of Israel, the profiteers, the politicians, the criminals? Nay, this is what he said. Ana Hashem chatati aviti pashati lefanecha ani uveiti b'nei Aaron. O Lord, I have sinned. I have failed. I am guilty. I am responsible for the suffering of man. I caused all the agony, misery, and injustice that shakes the structure of our ailing society. Who utters these terrible words? A traitor to the cause of God? A criminal? A social outcast? Nay, it is the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, the chosen representative of the chosen tribe, of the chosen people. He who represented the best, the highest, the noblest of Israel realized his responsibility. He began with a process of personal cleansing and repentance. Before he spoke of the sins of his people, he thought of his own. Let me say that one again. Before he spoke the sins of his people, he thought of his own. Before he blamed the world, he blamed himself. Then and only then had he a right to include others in this terrible indictment. Did he look for scapegoats, the legions of Greece, the cohorts of Rome, the treacherous Sadducees, the rich, the poor? No, he said, I have sinned, I have failed. I and my immediate family, the house of Aaron. And then he goes on to say, yes, and afterwards, of course, he says, and these have failed, and these have failed, and these have failed. But it starts right here. Has anybody here noticed that anti-Semitism has grown on the right and on the left? Has anybody here looked into their own mistakes in allowing it to grow on their own side? We spent many years as a Jewish community telling the other side what their problems were and not looking inwards and asking what the problems are in our own house. That is what polarization allows you to do quite easily. A posture of self-righteousness and sanctimoniousness that creates blind spots everywhere. I actually called my mom. I don't know if I called her, I just said it publicly and she heard it, and then I called her. This is gonna happen again. Shoot, this is gonna happen again. And I said, Mom, you know, we talked about campus issues. You know, I have a spouse who's a campus rabbi. We talked about campus issues, and I poo-pooed what you were worried about. Why did I do that? Why did I do that? Because it made me feel safer on my side. Don't do that. It's a bad idea. It doesn't work. It doesn't get us where we need to go. And that's not just about utility, it's about goodness. It's about shaping society, and it's about making your side the best it can be, right? Being in conversation with those who point out flaws. Yes, it is true. You might say, things that you tell me are flaws, I actually don't think are flaws. That's fine. But you ever feel that feeling in your chest when somebody, you know, points out a flaw of someone on your side, and before thinking about it, before considering if there might be merit to it, you're ready to defend? You're ready. All the time. All the time. That is what polarization does to us. It allows us to conveniently sidestep the problems within our own camp. And I don't think that we can afford to sidestep them anymore. So let's say this. The problem, to my mind, even if you agree with me, right? Let's say you agree with me that we can't really afford to be polarized in the ways that we've been okay being polarized. How does that actually look in the world? Because I myself, even as the speaker, said, in my opinion, there's somebody I cannot vote for. And then I'm in community and family with people who think that the person I voted for is someone I cannot vote for, right? But more importantly, who voted for somebody who I think they cannot vote for, right? So what I would say is, first of all, I think it needs work. I don't know. Because what you really want to do is you want to be able to maintain your moral integrity, not just for yourself, but in order to shape society. You want to be able to fight like hell for what you believe in, and then you still have to be in relationship with people who may be either fighting opposite you or just think your whole project is bunk, and vice versa. So I don't know exactly how to do it, but I want to give two examples of where I see it. The first is actually the first half of this lecture. Forcing people to think about how, what I think is overlap, somebody else thinks is wrong. What I think is the cost-benefit analysis, somebody else is walking around with a different cost-benefit analysis. Just that. Nobody's trying to change who you're voting for. By God, if that's your analysis, you got to vote for who you're going to vote for, right? But even understanding that is something. But there's a second thing that happened this week that, to me, I was like, oh, I think I just saw it. Everybody's heard of Rachel Goldberg, right? Hirsch's mom. There is a new Rachel Goldberg in the Jewish people. Her name is Rachel Goldberg. I heard her, I think 3 weeks ago. She's a violinist. Mother of, I think 8 children? 8 children? Maybe 10, somebody, I'm not sure. She's a violinist, and I heard her play a few weeks ago. I didn't realize her husband was in Lebanon, and she was there just playing her heart out. Very soulful, very soulful. And it turns out now she's sitting Shiva, because her husband was killed in Lebanon. And she made the following request. She said, any politicians who want to come visit us at Shiva have to come with a member of the opposing party, or they're not welcome at the Shiva. And that is what they did. Now, is that solving everything? Does that mean they suddenly agree? We don't want them to agree, right? You see some of those pairs going in and you're like, you're my guy, you're not my guy, right? But what she was demanding is she was demanding recognition of being in the same community. That's all she was demanding. And I think that's not too much for us to demand from ourselves and from those who find our views anathema. It's not too much to demand. And I would end by saying, perhaps if we can learn to be both incredibly committed and truly ardent in our fight for our beliefs, values, and shaping a vision, and at the same time be able to be in relationship with those whose ideas we may even be fighting, then perhaps that's something that we can teach America too. Thank you very much. And I want to give a quick disclaimer that I should have given before. Number one, just because I basically told you who I was voting for, that does not mean that I was telling anybody who they should vote for. Number two, disagree with me. I don't mind. Meaning, I'm serious. I'm not giving you something as this is the be-all and end-all. This is something that I see as a Jewish educator, as a Jewish leader, as somebody who cares about the future of Jewish community and the future of this country. This is my take right now. If it's not your take, I get it. But if it's your take and you just are afraid to express it, I hope I give you a little bit of cover, right? Let's take some Q&A or comments. Q&A.
I just put the microphone.
Sam, do people know who you are? Did you introduce yourself?
Hello, everybody. I'm Sam Ballo.
This is my colleague. He's a wonderful human being. I'm very lucky to work with him. He is, thank you. And he just got engaged recently. Okay, everybody's belly over here now. Okay, let's ask some questions. Yes, and just say your name if you don't mind, because community.
Hi, Fran Gordon. Welcome back to the neighborhood.
Thanks, it's great to be here. I'm running away right after this so that nobody can catch me. Fran.
So, core value, Derek Harris. And what I find really hard is that there's one candidate who just has total disregard for the institutions, the rule of law. And Derek Harris is just such a core Jewish value, and I wonder if you could just speak to that a little bit, why that hasn't been part of our public conversation within Jewish community.
Well, so I think it's an important question. I think, first of all, I think Jewish communities have lived for so many centuries under the rule of people who have no sense of Derek Harris. No, I'm serious. Meaning, I think America is a real outlier in that regard, or I should say, I think the last, I don't know, I'm not gonna get myself in trouble. I think there have been presidents in this country who do value Derek Harris, let's put it that way. But I think that is kind of the minority in the Jewish experience. So that's number one. Meaning, I just want to say that. It's not like I can come to you and be like, oh, we have so much in our literature that says the Tsar is disgusting and we shouldn't listen to him. But one second. The second thing is, I think that there are people for whom the fear of certain things, whether it's the creep of progressivism, not just against Israel, but just in general, whether it's the threat of a nuclear Iran, I think a threat of World War III, I think for some people, that animates them much more. It outweighs, right? And I think, meaning, you might have a different calculus on all of those things, right? You might say, I don't think this is actually going to thwart the threat of a nuclear Iran. I don't actually think that, I think this is actually going to make progressivism grow more anti a lot of things, maybe even more anti-Semitic, right? As a backlash, I think you can disagree on many fronts, but I'm just expressing what I understand from talking to people, even if I disagree and make different choices.
And when I say Derek Harris, so I just want to be clear, it's just like how we always managed in diaspora. We always had a basic respect because we had to. We kept our head down or whatever. Just respect for the law. That's what I meant. Not that we thought the Tsar was great.
No, I get it.
Okay.
I get it. Look, the statement in Pirkei Avot that you should be, forget about Pirkei Avot, when Jeremiah says that you should be praying for the welfare of your government, he's talking about the Babylonians, they destroyed the temple. And he's saying, pray for them, right? Meaning, It's complicated, yeah. I'm not saying, okay, I'm leaving that. Yes. And then, oh, in the back, sorry, we're gonna go in the back. They're trying to get all facets of the room. We're gonna work our way up, exactly. Maybe, the last word. Hi, who are you?
Hi, I'm Samantha Levy.
Hey, Samantha.
I was actually at a really interesting bipartisan discussion last night, and I actually kind of want to respond to the person who spoke up about their parents, because I was in a room with lots of people who I don't ideologically agree with yesterday. But I think their response to you would probably be that the Pikuach Nefesh outweighs their merits in this scenario, and they do believe that.
So Pikuach Nefesh just being saving of life, right?
They believe that this candidate.
I think
is
there are
saving
people,
lives.
yeah, meaning I
And
think
so
that's,
I think that's like an interesting argument. That's like, not that the devil is an advocate, because I don't believe he does. I think that would be the response that the other opposing side would give.
Yeah, and
That's not one that I believe in.
and look, I think the question is, I think the question is when you're having a conversation like that, and you're not actually going to agree, and you're going to go to the polls and you're going to do different things. My question is, so what's the basis of that relationship? The basis of that relationship can't be that we're going to agree politically, and it can't be that I'm going to change you or you're going to change me. It's got to be something else. And for Judaism, like, we actually have a lot of something else that binds us, whether we like it or not. We have a past, we have a present, we have a future, we have a heritage, we have a language, we have food, we have God, we have a lot of things, right? It's not easy. I'm not saying it's easy. Did you want to add anything else, Samantha? Or that was your piece?
That was my piece.
Okay, thank you very much. You guys work your way how you want to work your way. I don't want to get in trouble. Thank you. Sam, you just got engaged. Everybody loves you. Everybody loves you right now. Yes.
Hi, I'm Dee Dee Friedman.
Hi, Dee Dee. Good to see you again.
I think that there's follow-up for everybody, whether they vote left or right or progressive or to the left. And I think that's part of what Lieber, or excuse me, I think it's a pencil that we use this time. You know, and I think that's part of the consideration.
What do you mean by follow-up?
Well, if you vote one way, then you have to constantly call the president to be with the language that's being used. Very anti-Semitic language. The tropes are terrible.
I mean, I think to an extent, the Wurzburger piece of saying, how am I cleaning house on my own side? What you're really saying is, it doesn't end with who you vote for. You actually have to continue lobbying
Yes,
and developing
that's exactly
alliances.
where I'm going.
Yeah, I mean,
And the other side, you have to say, but you promised, but you said, we heard you, and you can name the date and the time, and you have to remind that person that you wanted our vote, you got our vote, and now you're here, and you better do this. So it is lobbying, but
Right.
you have to be ready to do that.
Right, I mean, I think
On
that's...
both sides.
I think that's very important for people to be thinking about, because this election, I think it's very high stakes in terms of who wins, but regardless of who wins, there are high stakes to how we follow up or how we don't. And I just would say, as you're saying, you know, you promised, it's even more than that. It's how do you create the interest, right? I mean, because politics is based on interest. How do you create the interest in people actually following up on what it is that they promised? Yeah, let's go in the front, then we're going to take that in the back, okay? I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I find it funny. Let's say I'll make up a scenario. Somebody's speaking on the TV, and I don't know who it is. I'm not in the same room that the TV is in. And I hear somebody making incendiary comments about the opposition. And this is not just in the realm of politics. It could be anywhere, any subject, any two people running against each other.
Yeah.
And they make the worst comments about the opponent. And I don't know what side the person's on, because people from both sides can make the same exact comments verbatim. And regard to the other opponent, to the opponent.
So are you saying that it kind of troubles you that in general, the way that people are engaging with their opponents is in this kind of non-Derech Eretz kind of way? Or are you saying that you can actually lodge the same complaints one to another?
Yes, you could use the same words.
Well, we do that about Israel all the time in the Jewish community.
Right.
You don't care about Israel, you don't care about Israel.
They're both anti-democracy.
Right.
They both mock what the other side says about
But-
democracy.
Here's the thing that I want to say. I think it's very important not to create a moral equivalence that people have to sign on to. In other words, people may accuse each other of being both anti-democracy, but I'm allowed to say, just because you're accusing each other of being anti-democracy, doesn't mean I don't think one of you is anti-democracy and the other one is not, right? Meaning, there's a difference between the discourse and what people are actually going to think about candidates, and I just want to make sure, because I think this is very, there's a nuance here that I want to make sure that people do not think that I am making a moral equivalence. I think that's very important. People should have their commitments to their judgments and their convictions. I am talking about even within having your commitments to your judgments and your convictions and your priorities and your anticipation of what is to come, nonetheless, you still belong to a Jewish community and a Jewish people that is larger than your understanding of those things or your choices about those things. So I just want to make sure I am not making a moral equivalence, even as I understand what you're saying.
But there's another aspect to this. I think both sides, and I am strongly on one side, and I won't have to mention which one it is, it really doesn't matter.
Yeah.
As it
You don't have to,
pertains to
sure.
conversation.
Yeah, it's
Is
nobody's
that
business.
is that the accusation is so wild from both sides, accusing one side being anti-democracy, anti-democratic, that I hope that what both sides say about each other, for the most part, falls on deaf ears. Because to me, it's just stupid. It's not from either
Right,
side.
meaning with the
It's
jousting of it
It's
it
a
doesn't
stupid
make
argument.
anyone smarter.
It's a stupid argument.
Interesting.
It's wild.
Appreciate
and
it.
it's very irresponsible on both sides.
I hear that. I really hear that. Thank you very much. All right, we'll take a few more, one from the back, and then we're going to come back to you, because I did promise him. Or I didn't promise.
First of all, thank you so much for this.
My pleasure.
Yeah, I feel like I should say that before I talk. Because
Before I tear you down.
No, on the contrary.
What's your name?
Ohad.
Hi, Ohad. I have a nephew named Ohad.
No way.
Yeah.
Apologies in advance because this is an idea that I'm trying to work out as I'm talking. So if I go on for too long, give me the Jeopardy countdown and I'll wrap it up. So I'm reading through the various prayers for, the
government.
welfare and the safety of the state, and it's reminding me of this line that I learned a lot. Dina de manifold, right? The law of the land is the law. And it came up in so many discussions that I've had about Jewish civics. And it's always been contrasted for me, the difference between the times when Dina de manifold was really important, because those were the times when Jews had limited influence over the state in which they lived, right? When they had some level of autonomy, it was like the shtetl for the Ashkenazi Jews that, they had a bit of self-government, governance, but really when it came down to it, they were still at the whim of somebody who was not from within their own community. Contrast that to American democracy. We feel that we have a lot more influence, but to an extent, like we're still roughly 2% of the population, maybe a little bit more of the voting population. We don't single-handedly determine our own fates in this state. With that being said, I do think that it feels a lot more urgent in a time like an election season when we're so often reminded that we have this kind of influence, and yet at the same time we hear all these things of, oh, if you don't live in a swing state, your vote doesn't matter. Or we're 2% of the population, how much is that going to influence the election? What would you say to this kind of conversation that we're having right now anytime other than the election, when our influence on policymaking is less salient? Or maybe outside of the whole October 7th conversation when it's everywhere in the news. Like, what should we be thinking about when we're not bombarded with this kind of conversation?
Yes, well, I actually think, and I'm going to be a hypocrite here because it's work that I need to do, I think the question is, how are you involved in shaping your local civic experience? There's way more than national politics, right? There's a lot of decisions that happen at the local level whether it's school boards, whether you're dealing with poverty, whether you're dealing with immigration situations, right? There's a lot that can be done. And I think it's worth getting involved, not just at the national level. I think it's moments like these because everyone feels implicated by this election, where it's the hardest to talk about community across difference, right? I mean, some people are involved in the local stuff, some people are not, some people care, some people don't, right? But I do think to be a civically minded person is to get involved in that local stuff, which I guess I'll do when my kids turn 25. Thank you. We're gonna take a last one, okay? Because I know, last one up here, if you don't mind. So.
Hi, I just wanted to thank you for talking about Jews as a family. I think that's such a beautiful concept and very important for us to think about really constantly now. And it was interesting you said political parties should not be the thing that keeps someone out of your house. So I guess in this election, how do you either manage that, like with your mom, or how do you think about...
Or I'm gonna get in trouble with my family because they said there's something I'm not allowed to move. It's so bad. I'm in my next conversation.
I guess maybe it's not a topic for another conversation, but just a little bit about how you're thinking about how to incorporate people in your family.
Empathy.
Just
empathy. Empathy. Empathy is a non-patronizing way to relate to another human being. And it takes a great deal of confidence in who you are to be able to empathize with someone who is deeply, deeply different than you. I am not saying that there are not boundaries that have to be drawn, right? No one's coming into my house and talking about Puerto Ricans in a particular way or Haiti in a particular way. I will tell them they can't talk like that in my house if they want to be in my house. But there are situations where it's any amount of difference. It's any amount of difference around things that feel important that somehow lead to the impossibility of empathy. And I wonder, I'm no neuroscientist, but neuroscientists have taught me that it is really hard when fear is the controlling element to have empathy. And I get that. And we're having that problem in a lot of different directions right now, I think. Okay? So here's what I want to end with. I hope that everybody goes out and votes. I hope that everybody goes out and votes for the candidate that they think is either the right overlap between what's good for the Jews and good for America, or is the right cost-benefit analysis for what they're looking for. And I hope that after you vote, you also remember that there are other modes in life besides for political party. Peoplehood, not just partyhood. Thank you very much. Good night.